explains Ken's son Rick. Living on food stamps. William Bud Post won $16.2 million in the Pennsylvania lottery, but now lives on his Social Security. I wish it never happened. It was a total nightmare, says Post. A former girlfriend successfully sued him for a share of his winnings. It wasn't his only lawsuit. A brother was arrested for hiring a hitman to kill him, hoping to inherit a share of the winnings. Other siblings pestered him until he agreed to invest in a car business and a restaurant in Sarasota, Florida. Two ventures that brought no money back and further strained his relationship with his siblings. Post even spent time in jail for firing a gun over the head of a bill collector. Within a year, he was $1 million in debt. He admits he was both foolish and careless, trying to please his family. Now he lives quietly on his monthly Social Security check and food stamps. What if you lost $1 billion? Years ago, a reporter asked Henry Ford, a billionaire when $1 billion was worth much more than it is today, what if you lost everything? Ford's response was, I'd have it back in less than 5 years. When you contrast Henry Ford's response to the responses of the lottery winners, I believe you get the difference between the process of becoming a millionaire by luck and that of becoming a billionaire by being an entrepreneur. A question to think about. After reading Henry Ford's response, I often ask myself, if I lost it all, how much would I recover in 5 years? If my past is any indicator, each time I hit zero, and I did hit zero a number of times, I came roaring back, making much more money than I lost. I've not made $1 billion as Henry Ford did, but my businesses have had income in the hundreds of millions of dollars. In my opinion, the entrepreneur's process is the best process to get rich because it is also an educational process to achieving great wealth, if you have the heart, mind, and stamina for it. Pouring the foundation. The educational process of becoming an entrepreneur requires the entrepreneur to learn and gain experience in the 5 levels of the BI triangle. Once a person becomes somewhat proficient in all 5 levels, life is pretty good. It took me about 10 years as an undergraduate student of the business school of the streets to attain a basic level of proficiency. Can a person attain proficiency at all 5 levels faster? Absolutely. One of the reasons for writing this book was to simply inform you of the levels. If you know about the levels, it makes it easier to focus your learning activities and personal development, level by level. Why cash flow is the base level. Most wannabe entrepreneurs focus on the product level, the top level of the BI triangle. While product is important, looking at the BI triangle, you notice that cash flow is the base level with the most area allocated to it. When I first started out as a professional entrepreneur, I used to get excited looking at new products or ideas. That is how I got caught up in the nylon wallet business. The nylon wallet was just one of about 50 different product ideas we considered. Some of the other ideas were wooden puzzles, sugar packets with Hawaiian pictures on the packets wrapped in a burlap box, a magazine, and even candy bullets packaged in a box that said, "Bite the bullet." As you can tell, our thinking ability was unlimited. As soon as we decided on the nylon wallet as our product, the 3 of us began designing its packaging. Again, this required thinking, which all 3 of us enjoyed. It was not long before we were hitting the streets looking for investors. Most potential investors were polite and took time to look at our product and its packaging. Then, if they were interested, they all asked the same questions. May I see your numbers? What are your projections? When we did not have the answers, we were turned down, and turned down quickly. Even Rich Dad turned us down, but he did not turn us down politely. He was furious. Kicking my two partners out of his office, he closed the door behind them and gave me one of the most severe reprimands I have ever had from either of my dads. I have written about this incident in other books, so I will not retell the details of the story, yet the lesson is worth repeating. The lesson is, for successful business people and investors, the numbers are very important. Today, older, wiser, and much wealthier, whenever I am asked to evaluate a new product or business, I do the same thing those investors did to me years ago. I ask for the numbers. This does not mean I am any better at reading or producing numbers today than I was in 1978. The difference is, I ask for them and then ask someone who was trained at reading the numbers to go over the numbers with me. My level of expertise is the communications level, and I do go over that portion of the business plan carefully. I am pretty good at the communications level, but not that good at the cash flow level. But that is not an excuse for me to ignore the cash flow level, or any level for that matter. As an entrepreneur and an investor, I need to know the entire business, not just the parts of the business I am interested in. If a wannabe entrepreneur asks to show me a new product, the first question I ask is, do you have financial projections? Or, if the business is an established business, I will ask, do you have financial statements? Again, I ask these questions not because I am great at numbers, but as a test of the wannabe entrepreneur's knowledge of what it takes to be an entrepreneur. If the wannabe entrepreneur does have actual numbers or projections, I will ask someone else whose strength is in accounting to come with me to interpret the numbers. The numbers tell a story, and I need someone who can read the numbers and interpret them to tell me the story. As an entrepreneur, I believe it is very important to tell your business story in numbers. It's better to pay early. If you are serious about becoming an entrepreneur, an interesting exercise is to hire an experienced accountant to help you with a proposed budget and cash flow analysis. Even if you do not go through with the product or the business, the exercise will give you a better idea of what it costs to start and run a business. Once you know your budget, you will have an idea of how much you will have to sell to support the business. The experienced accountant may also point out expenses you may not know about. I wish I had done this exercise before starting my nylon surfer wallet business. I might not have lost as much money as I did. The cost of hiring a trained accountant for guidance would have been a drop in the bucket compared to the money I lost. More important, the money you spend for an accountant will be priceless in your educational development as an entrepreneur. If you ask most accountants, I am certain they will tell you that most entrepreneurs lack knowledge of accounting laws and practices and are horrible at record keeping. Their lack of accuracy with numbers may eventually get them in trouble. It is this lack of knowledge that eventually costs them even more money. In other words, pay them a little early rather than pay a lot more later. Why I created the board game. One of the primary reasons I created the cash flow board game is the reprimand my rich dad gave me back in the 1970s. For most of my life, Rich Dad had been emphasizing the importance of the numbers, and I sincerely thought I understood them. It was not until he chewed me out when I lost so much money that I began to understand why he put such emphasis on the numbers. Today, I understand. The game serves as a communication bridge between you and your accountant. It will not make you an accountant. The game will give you the advantage of being more familiar with the T thinking and A thinking logic of the accounting profession. If you are like me, weak at the subject of accounting and numbers, I strongly suggest you use the cash flow games as an educational tool. Again, before quitting your job to start your business, I recommend that you sit down with an experienced accountant and go over a budget on what it may cost to start and operate your business. If the numbers shock you, simply take a deep breath and sleep on it for a night or two. Give yourself time to expand your mind around the costs. The cost of starting, building, or growing a business is often more than originally imagined. Keep your job. If the costs frighten you off, then maybe being an entrepreneur is not for you. High expenses are an everyday challenge in business. Taking on that challenge is one of the most important jobs of an entrepreneur. It requires a lot of A, T, P, and C thinking power to solve these challenges. Personally, I do not like the challenges, but every time I have taken them on, I have become a better, wiser, and more confident entrepreneur. Show me the numbers. When wannabe entrepreneurs call looking for money, they fall into two categories. One, those with a business plan and financial projections. Two, those with nothing. If a person comes with empty hands, it either means they are very early in the process or they don't have a clue what they are doing, or both. Talking only about the product without financial projections indicates these people have not really thought through the process. If I am interested, I may suggest they go back to the drawing board, follow the BI triangle as an outline, and then hire an accountant and come up with a business plan, which includes a set of numbers. One step to raising money. Whenever someone asks, "How do I raise money for my business?" I respond by asking, "Do you have a business plan?" A good business plan with a great presentation can raise the money you need. A bad business plan with a poor presentation can lose you money. This does not mean that the numbers of the business plan are cast in stone. The financial results of most startup businesses do not typically follow the plan or precisely meet the projections. The process of creating a business plan with numbers is an A thinking and T thinking process that causes the entrepreneur to think through the venture in more detail and then put it down on paper. Remember that a successful business is created before there is a business. The plan does not have to be elaborate. It can be very simple. A plan simply lets the potential investor see the thoughts inside the mind of the entrepreneur. Also, it allows the investor to know that the person is serious about the proposed business. Again, even if the business does not take shape, the process of thinking through the creation of a business, putting it down on paper, and matching it with numbers that tell the same story is an excellent educational process and reality check. It begins to balance school smarts and street smarts. Tell me a story. A number of years ago, a young man called me and asked for an appointment. When I asked for what purpose, he said, "I have a business proposal I would like to present to you." "Are you looking for investment money?" I asked directly. He stumbled and haltingly said, "Yes, I am." Normally, I do not look at businesses at this early stage, yet I was curious and agreed to meet him for lunch. A week later, I met him at a local restaurant. He was well dressed and had an impressive looking business plan. As I said, I am not good at reading the numbers, yet I do my best to listen to the story the numbers and the plan are telling me. The first thing I look at is the salary and wages line of the financial projections. For me, that is where the story begins. This young man had himself down for a $120,000 a year salary. My first question was, why do you need such a high salary from a business that does not exist? "Well, that is what I am being paid at my job today," he replied, a little indignantly. "Besides, I have a wife and 3 kids in school. It's the bare minimum I can live on." "Okay," I said, and continued looking at the business plan. As I said, the business plan and the financial projections tell a story. The salary requirement line was introducing me to the lead character, the hero of the story. I was gaining a glimpse into his brain, how he thought, how he spent money, and the priorities of his personal life. Seeing his salary requirements and getting into his head, I felt he was still thinking like an employee, looking for a high-paying job. As far as I was concerned, the lunch was over. I had seen enough just by getting to know the hero of the story. I knew that I did not want to invest in his business. Relating the financial statement to the BI triangle. Since we had not yet ordered lunch, and I still had to be polite, I looked next at the other expenses of the business and how they related to the BI triangle. In other words, my first step was to call on my P-thinking mind. I needed to get a sense of who this person was in front of me. My second step was to call on the C-thinking, A-thinking, and T-thinking minds and create a relationship between the financial statement and the 5 levels of the BI triangle. My next question was, what do you do for your current employer? What is your job? "I am a mechanical engineer by training," he replied. "I work in customer service, tracking customer orders through our system. That is where I developed my product. Let me tell you about it." "Just a moment," I said. "I just have a few questions about your projections." Pointing at the line entitled Advertising and Promotion, I asked, "What is this expense for $10,000 a month? What is your marketing plan?" "Oh, I haven't given that much thought yet. My plan is to hire an agency and let them handle our marketing." "Have you had much experience in sales or marketing?" I asked. "No, I haven't," he said. "I've spent most of my career working on the internal systems of a business. That is where I got my idea for my new product. It will revolutionize order tracking." "Have you talked to an intellectual property attorney to protect your idea?" "Well, I have looked, but I really have not found one yet." "In your plan, you only have $4,000 for attorney's fees. Why is that?" "Well, I wanted to keep my expenses down. Later on, when money comes in, then I'll hire more attorneys. For now, I think $4,000 is adequate to get me off the ground." "And who helped you with these projections?" I asked. "I do not see a line for accounting expenses." "Oh, you're right. I forgot that expense. How much do you think should be allocated to accounting fees?" "I don't know," I said. "I'm not an accountant. If you really want to know, you should ask one." "How do I find a good one?" "You can call my accountant, but he is very expensive and may be more than you need at this stage." "Oh," said the entrepreneur, "I am trying to keep my expenses down. I'll look for a cheaper accountant." Lack of real-world experience. Although this was hardly an in-depth look at the business, I had heard enough of the story. Eventually, I did get a look at his product, which never should have happened if he had had an intellectual property attorney's advice. He did not have me sign any document saying I would keep the product a secret, a big and clear indicator of this wannabe entrepreneur's lack of real-world experience. My own lesson learned. If I had liked the product, I could have simply taken his idea and taken it to market. How do I know this? Painfully, I know this lesson because I made the same mistake he was making. In 1977, I should have patented my nylon shoe pocket wallet for runners, but I decided to save a few dollars by not hiring a patent attorney. That is why, after coming up with the idea for the cash flow board game, I did not tell anyone about the game except for Kim and my engineer behind the game. The first person I went to find was an intellectual property attorney. This is one more example of turning bad luck into good luck. Because of my inexperience and my desire to save a few dollars by not patenting my nylon wallet, I subsequently lost millions of dollars. That bad luck was turned into good luck when I learned from that mistake by patenting my cash flow board game. One reason why the legal level lies just below the product level of the BI triangle is that the entrepreneur's ideas are often the company's most important assets. The attorney's job is to protect the company, its products, and its intellectual property before there is a product or a business. You need to protect your ideas, your most important asset. Saying no. The young engineer looked good. He had the look of a successful business leader. His new product looked promising. Yet I said, "No, I don't think I will invest in your business." The cash flow level of the BI triangle had revealed his strengths and weaknesses as an entrepreneur. In the end, I was not saying no to his product or ideas. I was saying no to him. He still had a lot of homework to do. Although the product looked promising, the entrepreneur's story did not. He might succeed, but I had my doubts. If he did succeed, I doubted if he had the ability to grow the business to a point where, as an investor, I could get my money back. So I passed on the opportunity to invest with him. There are no bad investments. My rich dad often said, "There are no bad investments, but there are many bad investors." He also said, "There are no bad business opportunities, but there are many bad entrepreneurs." In my opinion, this young engineer had a great idea for a great new product. However, his ideas about business were not so great. What Rich Dad wanted to pound into our heads was that the world was filled with mega-million-dollar opportunities. The problem is that there are more mega-million-dollar opportunities than there are mega-million-dollar entrepreneurs. That is why the cash flow level of the BI triangle is so important. It tells the story, not of the opportunity, but of the entrepreneur. This is especially true in the creation phase of the business, when the business is not yet a business. Red flags. One reason why your banker does not ask you for your school report card or your grade point average or what subject you majored in is that a banker is not looking for a measure of your academic intelligence. Your banker is looking for your level of financial intelligence, which indicates your level of financial responsibility. how much you earn, what you spend your money on, and how much you keep. When looking at financial projections, or better yet, the actual financial numbers from an existing business, I have learned to look for similar indicators. When looking at the numbers, forecast or actual, there are certain items that are red flags for me. Red flag number 1, extravagant salaries. You may have already noticed that I looked at that line first. It tells me a lot about the entrepreneur. One thing it tells me is what is more important to the entrepreneurs, the business or their personal lives. Many, many times I have met entrepreneurs who rape, starve, and torture their business rather than feed and nurture the business. A friend of mine consulted with a building maintenance company in Denver that was having cash flow problems. The business had great contracts with offices and apartment houses to keep the parking areas swept in summer and free of snow in winter. With low overhead and high margins, the company should have been doing well. Instead, the business was always in financial trouble. Upon further inspection, my friend found that the owner had expensive ski chalets in Vail and Aspen, with the accoutrements, doodads, to match. On top of that, the company had flashy cars and threw lavish parties, all at company expense. To make matters even worse, he had been lying to the IRS and the state tax department, and his actions were starting to border on tax evasion rather than tax avoidance. When my friend recommended that he sell his houses and his cars, cut back on his spending, and hire a high-powered accounting firm to beg for mercy, my friend was fired. The owner still thought there was something wrong with the business. This is an extreme example of an entrepreneur putting his needs before the needs of the business. The numbers of the business told the story of both the business and the entrepreneur. Red flag number 2, good expenses and bad expenses. This is one of Rich Dad's most important lessons. He said, "The reason so many people are poor is that they are poor spenders." In other words, there are good expenses and bad expenses. He also said, "The rich are rich because they have expenses that make them rich. The poor are poor because they have expenses that make them poor." Regarding the subject of entrepreneurship, he said, "Most people are not good entrepreneurs because they are savers rather than smart spenders." One of the downfalls of my nylon surfer wallet business was my desire to save money and not spend $7,000 on patent attorney fees. Saving a few $1,000s cost me a multi-million-dollar business. My lesson was to learn to spend money that made me money. A friend of a friend has always had a tough time in her business. Over lunch with her, she told me she was spending $50,000 redecorating her apartment. When I asked her if she owned the apartment, she said, "No, I don't have enough money for a down payment, so I just rent." When I quizzed her as to why she would spend so much money on a property she didn't own, she got angry. "Well, I need to have a nice place to live." At that moment, I believe I got a glimpse of what caused her business struggles. She simply spends money foolishly. One of the reasons the BI triangle is named after the B and I quadrants on the right side of the cash flow quadrant is that an individual must know how to spend money and get that money back with a respectable return on the right side of the quadrant. One of the reasons people on the E and S side of the quadrant have a tough time as entrepreneurs is simply that they know how to work for money, but they do not know how to spend money and then have the money come back with more money. This ability to spend money and have your money come back with more money is essential to entrepreneurs and investors on the B and I side of the cash flow quadrant. Between 1997 and 2005, the real estate market boomed. Even though the market boomed, I met many individuals who invested in real estate and failed to make any money. To me, this is a signal that this person does not know how to spend money and have the money return with more money. These people may not make good entrepreneurs, or they need to work on their business skills. When I look at the numbers of a business, I am looking for this ability to spend money and have the money return with more money. This is an essential skill. Red flag number 3, money talks. Rich Dad said, "There is a big difference between a business and busyness." The reason most people do not make good entrepreneurs is that they are busy and work hard, but they do not make any money. An entrepreneur must make money. The money shows up at the cash flow level of the BI triangle. A few years ago, I read an article about a couple who were both laid off. Both were highly paid marketing executives with a major New York firm, making over $250,000 combined income. After a year in their own business as marketing experts, their business earned less than $26,000. Why? I suspect one reason was that, as high-paid corporate employees, they were never held accountable to the bottom line of the company they worked for. As entrepreneurs, owners of their own business, they had to be very accountable. They found out that their marketing skills in the corporate world did not translate to financial success on the streets. Suddenly, they found out that owning a business does not mean simply working hard and being busy. Owning a business means your activities show up directly on the bottom line as money made and money lost. Rich Dad would say, an employee can be paid for being busy. An entrepreneur is paid for results. The results are often known as the bottom line. That is why the cash flow level is the base of the BI triangle. As Rich Dad said, you do not need a safe deposit box for excuses. To me, certain red flags indicate the entrepreneur is stuck in a part of the developmental process. Will the entrepreneur learn from the process and move on, or keep raising the same red flags? Red flags occur in life as well as in business. Whenever someone gets stuck in their process, I have noticed that life sends up red flags of its own. They can be warnings such as bad health, bad luck, or bad relationships. Rich Dad said, red flags are warnings. We can choose to heed the warning and learn, or ignore the warning. If you do not heed the warning, the process may change directions on you and a new process may begin. My real dad smoked 2 to 3 packs of cigarettes a day. The red flags were flying for most of his life. He did not heed the warnings and was eventually diagnosed with lung cancer. He finally quit smoking, but it was too late. One process ended, and a new one began. His next process was a battle for life, a battle he lost a year later. Be accountable. There is an overused statement that goes, money talks and BS walks. Where money talks the loudest is on the bottom line of a financial statement. As an entrepreneur, you do not have to be an accountant, but you do need to be accountable. Before you quit your job, please remember 2 things. 1. Employees and advisors are not responsible for the bottom line. Entrepreneurs are. 2. When you look at the cash flow quadrant, People on the E and S side of the quadrant are not required to have financial statements. However, financial statements are required by people on the B and I side. Why? Because money talks, and the story it tells is of the financial acumen of the individual in the B or I quadrant. These individuals are measured by their financial success in the B or I quadrant. Think like a CFO. If you would like to improve your financial skills at the cash flow level of the BI triangle, I strongly recommend you get the cash flow game and play it often. The game teaches you to think like a CFO, a chief financial officer, an important member of any entrepreneurial team. The buck stops with the entrepreneur. A CEO or entrepreneur cannot pass the buck. Making excuses or blaming subordinates is never attractive. The buck stops with the entrepreneur or CEO. That is why the cash flow level is the base level of the BI triangle. That is where the bucks stop. As an entrepreneur, you are the person responsible for the entire BI triangle. So, before you quit your job, always remember where the buck stops and that money talks. Rich Dad's Entrepreneurial Lesson Number 6. The best answers are found in your heart, not in your head. Chapter 6. The 3 Kinds of Money. What did you learn in Vietnam? Asked Rich Dad. I learned the importance of mission, leadership, and the team, I replied. Which was the most important? The mission. Good, Rich Dad smiled. You'll make a good entrepreneur. A Green Marine. In early 1972, my job was to pilot a UH-1 Huey helicopter gunship in Vietnam. After 2 months in the war zone, my co-pilot and I had flown several missions, but had not yet encountered enemy fire. This was soon to change. On the day I finally met the enemy, things were already very tense for me. We flew with our doors open, and the wind chattered through the aircraft. Looking back at the aircraft carrier, our home, I was once again reminded that this was a war zone and my school days were over. For 2 years, I had trained for this mission. I knew that each time we crossed the beach and flew over land, there were real live enemy soldiers with real guns and real bullets waiting for us. Turning to look back at my crew of 3, 2 machine gunners and a crew chief, I asked on the intercom, "Are you guys ready?" Not saying anything, they simply gave me a thumbs up. My crew knew I was green and untested. They knew I could fly, but they did not know how I would perform under the pressure of combat. Initially, there were 2 helicopters in our flight. About 20 minutes into the flight, the lead aircraft had to turn back. Apparently, there were electrical problems. We were told by the powers that be on the aircraft carrier to continue and to remain on call in the area. You could feel the tension mount in our aircraft because the lead aircraft had the more experienced pilots. They had been in combat for over 8 months. On top of that, their aircraft carried air-to-ground rockets. My aircraft only had machine guns. As the lead aircraft turned and headed back toward the ship, the anxiety in my aircraft was very real. None of us liked being out there alone. We passed over some of the most beautiful beaches in the world and headed north. We had dark green rice paddies to our left, blue-green ocean to our right, and white sand beaches below us. Suddenly, over the radio, 2 Army helicopters broadcast that they needed help. They were in a battle with a 50 caliber machine gun in the hills beyond the rice paddies. Being close by, we responded and began flying toward their location. Flying just below the clouds, we soon saw the Army helicopters in a firefight with the machine gun on the ground. There was also a lot of small arms fire coming from enemy troops in the area. It was easy to tell the difference between the rounds from the 30 caliber guns that the troops carried and the heavier 50 caliber rounds from the machine gun. The tracers from the 30 caliber small arms fire looked like hot red-orange specks zipping up against the dark green sky. The 50 caliber tracer rounds looked like flying ketchup bottles. I took a very deep breath and kept flying. Watching the battle as we flew closer, I kept hoping the Army helicopters would destroy the machine gun and not need our help. But no luck. When one of the Army helicopters was hit and fell from the sky, I knew we were going to be part of the fight. As the smoking helicopter spiraled to the ground, the tension climbed even more in our aircraft. Looking back at my crew, I simply said, "Clear the decks, make the guns hot, we're going in." I did not know what we were going to do. I simply knew we had to be prepared for the worst. The second Army helicopter broke off from the fight and went down to pick up the crew of the first helicopter. That left us, a single aircraft with only 30 caliber machine guns, about to face an estimated 15 troops with guns and a 50 caliber machine gun. I wanted to turn and run. I knew that it was the smart thing to do. Yet, not wanting to appear like a wimp to my men, I kept flying toward the location of the 50 caliber machine gun. I was now flying on pure bravado and hoping for the best. With the two Army helicopters out of the way, the ground fire turned on us. Although it was far away, seeing real live rounds being fired at me was a sight and feeling I will never forget. My crew had been in this situation before. Their silence told me that this was a particularly bad situation to be in. As the first 50 caliber rounds came up short of our aircraft, my crew chief tapped me on the helmet, pulled and turned my helmet so we were face to face, and said, "Hey, Lieutenant, do you know what is bad about this job?" Shaking my head, I feebly said, "No." Smiling his broad, toothy grin, the crew chief, on his second tour in Vietnam, said, "The problem with this job is there is no second best. If you decide to fight, either we are going home today or those guys on the ground are going home. But both of us aren't going home. One of us is about to die. It's up to you to decide which one of us that is. Them or us." Looking back at my gunners, young men of 19 and 20, I spoke into the intercom again and said, "You guys ready?" Both young men gave me a thumbs up, as all good Marines are trained to do. They were ready. They were trained to follow orders, regardless of whether their leader was competent or not. Realizing their lives were in my hands did not make me feel any better. At that moment, I stopped thinking only about myself and began thinking about all of us. Silently, I shouted to myself, "Think, should we turn and run, or should we fight?" Then my mind began feeding me excuses as to why we should turn and run. You're a single aircraft. There should be at least two aircraft. Isn't there a rule saying you cannot fight unless there are two aircraft? The lead pilots are gone. They had the rockets. No one will blame us if we turn and run. Maybe we can go down and help the Army pilots. Yeah, let's go help them. Then we don't have to do our job. Then we have an excuse for not fighting. We were on a rescue mission. We saved some Army flyers. Yeah, that sounds good. Then I asked myself, what if we miraculously win? What if we beat that 50 cal and live? What will we get? The answer came back. We all might receive some medal for bravery. We'll be heroes. And what if we lose? The answer came back. We'll be dead or captured. Glancing back at the two young gunners, I decided their lives were worth more than a medal on a ribbon. So was mine, I admitted to myself. Being brave and stupid was ruled out. The 50 caliber rounds were flying closer to us. The gunner on the ground was increasing his accuracy with every shot. Back at flight school, we learned that a 50 caliber round had a greater range than a 30 caliber round. We had 30 caliber machine guns. That meant he was going to be able to hit us long before we could get to him. Suddenly, a burst of 50 caliber rounds zoomed just past my window. Without thinking, I banked to the left and dove toward the ground to increase the distance between the enemy gunner and us. Since I had no idea what I was doing, I decided it was time to think. Flying straight into the machine gunner was certain death. As my aircraft was diving toward the ground in a sharp left bank, I used my radio and broadcast to anyone in the area. This is Marine helicopter Yankee Tango 96, 50 cal located, need help. Out of the blue, a loud, clear, confident voice crackled through my headset. Yankee Tango 96, flight of 4 Marine A4s RTB, returning to base, have extra ordnance and fuel on board. Give us your position and we'll give you a hand. Relief ran through our crew as I radioed our position to the Marine Corps pilots of the jets. In a few minutes, I could see 4 specks flying low to the ground, coming to our assistance. Seeing us, the flight leader radioed, "Before we get too close, fly back toward Charlie and see if you can draw his fire. Once we see his tracers, we'll take care of the rest." With that, we turned and once again flew toward the 50 caliber machine gun. Once his tracers began flying at us again, the wing leader of the 4 jets radioed, "Target in sight." In less than 5 minutes, the 50 caliber machine gun was no longer a problem. My crew and I were the ones who went home that night. Different teams, same mission. There have been many times I sit quietly and reflect on that day. Although I said thank you over the air once the fight was over, I still wish I had had the chance to meet those guys in person, shake their hands, and say thank you. We were on different teams from different ships, but we all shared the same mission. All wars are horrible. War is simply humanity at its worst. War is a time when we use our best technology and our bravest people to kill our fellow human beings. During my year in Vietnam, I saw the worst of humanity. I saw sights I wish I had never seen. I also caught glimpses of a spiritual power, a dedication to a higher calling I would never have witnessed if I had not gone to war. When the term band of brothers is used to describe the bond between soldiers, I wonder if someone who has never fought in a war can ever know what that bond feels like. For me, it is a spiritual bond dedicated to a higher calling, something known as a mission. Mission statements. In business today, it is very fashionable to tout one's mission statement, the sole driving purpose for forming the business. After my Marine Corps and Vietnam experience, I have remained skeptical each time someone says, The mission of our business is. My skepticism causes me to wonder how much the word mission is just that, only a word. The stronger mission wins. One day I was flying near the DMZ, the demilitarized zone that used to separate North Vietnam from South Vietnam. Looking down upon the carnage raging below me, I noticed something that deeply disturbed me. Returning to the aircraft carrier that night, I raised my hand during the debriefing and asked, why do their Vietnamese fight harder than our Vietnamese? Are we fighting for the wrong side? Are we fighting for the wrong cause? Needless to say, I was threatened with a court-martial for such treasonous-sounding words. To me, I was not being treasonous. I was only asking a question. I was simply expressing an observation, something I had noticed since arriving in Vietnam. It seemed to me that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese soldiers fought harder, tougher, and with more tenacity than our Vietnamese soldiers. From my perspective, the Vietnamese soldiers on our side did not seem to fight as hard. Personally, I did not feel we could count on them. I often wondered, if we stopped paying them, would they keep fighting? To be fair, there were many U.S. soldiers who were not there to fight either. Many were draftees who were unlucky enough to be drafted. If they were offered a choice of a plane ticket home or to stay and fight, many would have been on the plane. Halfway through my tour, I realized we were not going to win. We were not going to win even though we were better equipped, had the best technology, overwhelming firepower, the highest pay, and well-trained men and women. I knew we were not going to win simply because our side, the South Vietnamese as well as the Americans, lacked a strong enough mission, a higher calling, a reason to fight. We had lost our hearts. At least, I had lost mine. I did not want to kill anymore. I was no longer a good Marine. My experience in Vietnam proved to me that the stronger mission wins. The same thing happens in business. A vow of poverty. Most of us know that men and women of religious faith have taken vows of poverty in support of their spiritual mission. When I was a little boy, my dad explained to me that his friend, a Catholic priest, had taken a vow of poverty. Asking him what that meant, he said, "He has dedicated his life to God and God's work. That means money is not to be a part of his life. He lives an austere life in the service of God." "What does austere mean?" I asked. Tiring of the 1,000 questions a child asks, my dad's answer was, "Never mind what austere means. You will find out later on." A number of years later, I found out what austere meant. Sitting in a classroom for new Marine Corps officers, the instructor explained to the class that throughout history, men and women of war have also taken vows of poverty. The instructor said, in the feudal times, many knights took a vow of poverty in order to be true to their calling. They did not want money or desire worldly goods to interfere with their dedication to God and King. Before joining the Marine Corps, I was a ship's officer on an oil tanker for Standard Oil of California. I was being paid over $4,000 a month, which was a lot of money in 1969. Even though I was draft exempt because I was sailing for the oil industry, a classification known as non-defense vital industry, both my dads encouraged me to serve my country in time of war. As a Marine Corps officer, my pay dropped to less than $300 a month. Sitting in that classroom, listening to the instructor, reminded us that throughout history, men and women of war took vows of poverty. I finally found my definition of the word austere, the definition my dad did not give me some years before. 3 kinds of income, 3 kinds of money. There are 3 kinds of income. 1. Ordinary income. 2. Portfolio income. 3. Passive income. My poor dad worked for ordinary income, the highest taxed income there is. My rich dad worked primarily for passive income, the lowest taxed income. These terms for the 3 types of income actually come from the Internal Revenue Service. The tax department taxes the 3 incomes at different rates. An entrepreneur has the opportunity to work for all 3 types of income and needs to know the differences because the different tax rates can make a huge difference to the bottom line. I mention these incomes now not to confuse you, but to distinguish them from the discussion on the 3 different types of money I am about to discuss. When we were in high school, Rich Dad taught his son and me that people work for 3 different types of money. They are 1. Competitive money, 2. Cooperative money, 3. Spiritual money. Competitive money. To explain competitive money, he said, we learn to compete early in life. We compete in school for grades, we compete in sports, and we compete for the person we love. At work, we learn to compete for jobs, for raises, for promotions, for recognition, and for survival. In business, companies compete for customers, market share, contracts, and good employees. Competition is survival of the fittest, dog eat dog. Most people work for competitive money. Cooperative money. To explain cooperative money, he said, in sports and in business, cooperation is known as teamwork. The richest, most powerful entrepreneurs have built the biggest businesses in the world via cooperation. They become more competitive due to the cooperation of their team. Most entrepreneurs of large businesses are great team leaders. Spiritual money. Explaining spiritual money was a little bit more difficult. He said, spiritual money is created by doing God's work, work that God wants done. It's work being done in response to a higher calling. Not understanding what Rich Dad meant, I asked him, you mean like forming a church? His reply was, there are entrepreneurs who do form churches, just as there are entrepreneurs who form charities. Both could be examples of working for spiritual money, but spiritual money is not restricted to simply a church or charity. For years, this category puzzled me, and I often had discussions with him on this subject. During one of these discussions, he said, most people go to work for money, nothing else. They do not care if it is competitive, cooperative, or spiritual. For many people, work and money are just a means to an end. If you paid them twice as much to not work, many would take your offer. You mean they would not work for free? I asked with a smirk. No, definitely not. If you did not pay most people, they would move on looking for another job. They may want to help you and your business, but they have bills to pay and families to feed. They need money, any kind of money. They would choose their job depending upon which one paid the most and had the best benefits. So, is spiritual money like loving your work and doing what you love? No, smiled Rich Dad. Doing what you love is not what I mean by spiritual money. So what is spiritual money? I asked. Is it working for free? No, That is not it either. It's not about working for free, because spiritual money is not really about money. Spiritual money is not about money? If it is not about money, then what is it about? I asked. It's about doing a job not because you want to do it, but because it must be done, and you know deep down in your soul you're the one that is supposed to do it. How do you know you're supposed to do it? I asked. Because it disturbs you that no one else is doing it. You may say to yourself, why isn't someone doing something about this? Could it anger you? I asked. Oh, yes, said Rich Dad softly. It can also sadden you or even break your heart. It may seem like an injustice or a crime to you. It probably disturbs your sense of decency. It seems unfair, an injustice. Don't most people have these feelings about something in their life? I asked. Yes, but most people don't do anything about it. They go to work and say things such as, why doesn't the government do something about it? Or they write letters to the editor and complain. But they don't do anything about it, I added. Quietly, Rich Dad said, in most cases, no. They may talk about it, they may complain about it, but they do little about it. After all, they are too busy at their job, earning enough money to pay the rent and saving enough money to take the kids to Disneyland. What would happen if they did do something about it? I asked. What might happen? If they were truly committed to solving the problem, I would say that the invisible forces of this universe, of God, might come to their support. Magic might happen in their lives. This is when spiritual money comes into play. But it is more than money. People you never met before come to join forces with you, not for the money, but for the mission. Why do they join you? I asked. Because they are on the same mission. That was about all I could handle that day. I had a test the next day, and my mission at the time was to get out of high school. Giving your gift. About a year went by, and once again I brought up the subject of spiritual money. If I simply work on a problem I know needs to be worked on, will that bring in the invisible forces, the spiritual money? Rich Dad laughed and said, maybe and maybe not. I'm not the one who makes those decisions. I will say this. One of the keys to attracting the invisible magical forces is to be dedicated to giving your gift. What? I responded with a jolt. Giving my gift? What do you mean by a gift? A special God-given talent, Rich Dad replied. Something you are the best at. A talent God gave especially to you. And what would that be? I asked. There is nothing I know of that I am the best at. Well, you have to find it. Does everybody have one? I'd like to think so, smiled Rich Dad. If everyone has a gift, why are so many people below average? I asked. Rich Dad roared with laughter at that question. Finally composing himself, he said, because finding your gift, developing your gift, and giving your gift is very hard work. Most people do not want to work that hard. Now I was puzzled. It seemed to me that if God had given us a gift, it should be apparent. It should be easily accessible. When I asked Rich Dad to clarify this, he said, great doctors spend years in school and then practice for years developing their gift. Great golfers have practiced for years developing their gift. While there are the exceptions, such as child prodigies, most people have to dedicate their life to finding and developing their gift. Unfortunately, the world is filled with gifted people who never develop their gift. Finding one's gift can be hard work, and then developing one's gift can be even harder work. And that is why so many people appear to be below average. So that is why most professional athletes practice harder than amateurs? I asked. They dedicate their life to developing their strength and skills in order to develop their gift. Rich Dad nodded. Once again, I had heard more than I could handle. The discussion was over, but I remembered the lesson. Good is the enemy of great. There are two books I recommend to friends who are dedicated to becoming the best they can be in life. I strongly recommend both books for anyone dedicated to becoming a great entrepreneur. The first one is Good to Great by Jim Collins. We have read and held study groups on this book 5 times. Each time our group studied the book in depth, it seemed like we were reading a different book. The opening line of Good to Great says it all. Collins begins by stating, "Good is the enemy of great." Keeping with the subject of finding one's gift, we all know the world is filled with good business people, good athletes, good parents, good workers, and good governments. But the world has a shortage of great business people, great athletes, great parents, great workers, great governments, and so on. Why? Because for many of us, good is good enough. If my rich dad were here today, he would say, bringing out your gift is about bringing out your greatness, not just what you are good enough at. Good to Great is filled with lessons essential for big and small businesses. In our study groups, each person seemed to find a lesson that was written just for him or her. For me, the lesson that hit me the hardest was the lesson that greatness is a choice. It is not about being gifted or talented or more fortunate than others. It's about a choice we all can make. Being a person who has been average and below average for most of my life, the idea that I had the choice to change all that was a message from the book that went straight to my heart and my soul.